The drums stopped, and in the silence Vesna understood that the next sound she heard would be her own unmaking. They had brought her out into the great yard of Grimhold at first light, where the frost lay blue in the shadow of the walls and the whole pack had gathered to watch. She had cooked for some of these people. She had sat up through fever nights with their children. Now they would not meet her eyes, and the ones who did looked at her the way a person looks at meat gone bad. At the top of the steps stood Rurik Alpha, king of Vilemore, her mate of 3 winters, so beautiful that even now, something in her chest turned over uselessly at the sight of him. She hated that, most of all. "Bring her forward," he said. 2 wardens took her arms. She did not fight them. She walked the length of the frost on her own 2 feet, chin level, and if her hands shook inside the rope, no one would see it. The speaker unrolled the right. Vesna had heard the severing spoken once, over a man who had sold the pack to raiders. She had never thought to hear it spoken over her. For a mate who cannot answer the moon, who carries no wolf, who bears no heir, is no mate, but a hollow at the king's side, wolfless. The word went round the yard, like a draught. On the nights of the change, when every soul in Grimhold gave themselves to the moon, Vesna had lain alone in her human skin and waited for a wolf that never once came. They had called it an illness. Then a shame. Now, at last, a fault to be cut away. "Do you sever her?" the speaker asked. "I sever her?" Rurik said. He came down the steps. From the crowd, a woman rose to stand at his shoulder as though she had every right to, golden, unhurried, a small, satisfied stillness at the corner of her mouth. Dorian. It had been Dorian for longer than Vesna had let herself know. Rurik lifted his hand to the braided cord at her throat that marked her as his and tore it away. The little sound of it breaking was the loudest thing she had ever heard. "You came to me with nothing," he said, low, for her alone. "A foundling. No line, no wolf. Remember that when you're cold. Then, for the yard, take her name. Take her mark. Put her beyond the gate." They cut her braid to the scalp. They struck the pack mark from the back of her hand with a warden's blade. They took her cloak, her rings, her boots, for the cast-out leave as they came, and she came with nothing. Barefoot in the frost, shorn, bleeding, Vesna turned to face the gate, and it was then that one man moved. He stood at the edge of the yard, a big man with a soldier's stillness, a scar cutting pale through the dark of his beard, and one eye. She did not know his face. As a boy raised a stone to throw, the stranger closed a hand round the boy's wrist without seeming to hurry, and the stone dropped. Then he crossed to her, unpinned the gray cloak from his own shoulders, and set it around hers. "Walk north," he said, so quietly it was almost inside her own head, past the black ridge. "To the old castle no wolf will follow you to. Do you hear me? North?" She stared at him. "Why? Because you are not what they think you are." His one eye held hers. "You never were." Then the wardens had her again, and the gate of Grimhold groaned open onto the white waste, and they put her through it, and it boomed shut behind her. She should have wept. She waited to weep. Instead, from far to the north, from the ruin, the pack named only to frighten children, something reached up through the frozen ground and touched the soles of her bare feet. A warmth, a pulse, slow and enormous and old, like a heartbeat, like a voice that had waited a very long time, saying a name, her name. The pack had just taken it from her, and the land beneath Valemore gave it back. Cold is a patient thing. It does not hurry. It takes the feet first, then the hands, then the will, and Vesna had walked half a day into the white before she understood it was trying to take her too. She had gone north. She told herself it was because north led away from Grimhold, away from the yard and the broken cord and Dorian's small smile. She did not let herself think it was because a scarred stranger had told her to, or because the warmth in the ground had come from that direction and had not entirely left her since, a faint low thread under everything, like a fire banked in another room. The black ridge rose out of the snow near dusk, a spine of dark rock the wind had scoured bare. She climbed it because there was nothing else to do but lie down and die, and she was not, it turned out, ready to lie down and die. That surprised her. She had thought this morning that they'd emptied her of everything. Apparently not quite. At the top of the ridge she stopped, and her breath went out of her. Below, in a bowl of dead forest, stood Elderfell. She had grown up on the stories every pup in Vale Moor had. The castle where the ground goes wrong. The place the wolves will not den. Go there, Mother said, and your wolf goes silent and never wakes. Go there, and the dark under the stones will drink you. It was where they threatened to send the disobedient. It was, the pack said, cursed. It did not look cursed. It looked asleep. Towers, broken like old teeth, yes, and the roofs long fallen, and the whole of it half swallowed by a forest of black dead trees. But there was a shape to it under the ruin, a great and patient shape, and as the last light failed, Vesna would have sworn the warmth in the ground grew stronger, grew glad, the nearer she came. She was most of the way down the slope when she heard the hound. She turned. On the ridge behind her, a tracker stood against the last of the sky, one of Rurik's. She knew the gray of him even at distance, and a great pale hound strained at the lead beside him, sent to be sure, sent to bring back proof. The wolfless queen was dead in a drift where she could shame no one. The hound had her scent. It bayed and lunged. Vesna ran. She ran on, feet. She could no longer feel, through the dead trees, toward the broken gate of a cursed castle, and behind her the hounds baying rose and rose, and then at the tree line, at the very edge of Elderfell's ground, it stopped. She looked back. Once the hound had planted all 4 feet in the snow. Its hackles stood in a ridge down its spine, and it would not, cross onto the castle's ground. It howled and cringed and dug backward against the lead. And the tracker had gone gray in the face. He was staring past her at the dark of the castle with the look of a man staring into a grave, and he did not take one single step off the ridge. He hauled the hound around and fled, and the dark came down, and Vesna stood alone and unpursued inside the tree line of the place the whole world feared. No wolf will follow you there, the stranger had said. He had been right. She walked in under the broken gate. Inside was a courtyard open to the sky, drifted with snow, ringed by black arches. It was silent, in a way the forest had not been, a held silence, a listening silence. Her bare feet found stone under the snow, worn smooth, carved. She could not read the carving in the dark. She sank down against a fallen pillar, because her legs would carry her no further, and she pulled the gray cloak tight, and she thought, with a strange calm, that this was as good a place as any to die, and better than a drift where Rurik's man could find her. Then she saw it. Under the snow, where her frozen fingers had scraped the drift away from the base of the pillar, the stone was carved with a spiral, and set into the center of the spiral was a stone worn to a hollow, dark and dry. The shape of it unmistakable once she saw it. A place for something to be poured. She did not decide to do it. Later, she would think about that she had not decided anything. She only lifted her hand, the hand they had struck the packmark from that morning, still torn and beaded dark along the cut, and she pressed it into the hollow in the stone, and her blood ran down into the spiral. The whole castle drew a breath. She felt it go through the ground beneath her, through the pillar at her back, through her own bones. A long, slow, indrawn breath, as though the place had been holding still for 100 years and only for her, let itself move. The spiral filled. The blood did not pool. It sank, drawn down and down as though the stone were thirsty, as though the stone had been thirsty for a very long time. Warmth bloomed up out of the hollow into her palm. And in the black arch across the courtyard, where a stair went down into the dark under the castle, A stair she had not even seen until this moment. A light kindled. Not torchlight. Something softer, greener, deeper. It came up out of the earth far below like the glow of a sunrise buried alive, and it was climbing, slowly, stair by stair, toward her. Something enormous had woken beneath Elderfell, and it was coming up to meet her. Any sensible creature would have run. Instead, she went down the stair toward the light, because the warmth had spread from her hand into her arm, and from her arm into her chest. And for the first time since the drums stopped that morning, she was not cold, and a body will forgive almost anything of the thing that makes it warm. The stair went down farther than a castle should have room for. The walls changed as she descended. Dressed stone, then older stone, then no stone at all, but living rock and roots. Roots everywhere, pale and vast, threading the walls like veins, thick as her waist, thick as a horse, and all of them faintly, greenly aglow, brightening as she passed, as though her nearness woke them one by one. At the bottom, the stair opened into a cavern with no far side that she could see, and in the center of it grew the thing all the roots came from. She had no word for it. A tree, perhaps once, long ago. But a tree the way a mountain is a stone. Its trunk went up into dark beyond the reach of the light, and down into dark below, and it was not made of wood, but of something between wood and pale stone. And the inside of a shell, and it breathed. She could see it breathe. The whole vast pale mass of it, swelling and settling, slow as tides. Warmth came off it. Light came off it. And a sound came off it, below hearing, that she felt in her teeth and her sternum and the wet of her eyes, the same slow, enormous pulse that had touched her feet in the snow outside Grimhold. A full day's walk, and a whole world away. It had called her, from there. It had been calling her, she understood, her whole life. On every night of the change, while the pack ran under the moon and she lay wolfless and alone and thought herself broken, she had not been listening to the wrong thing. She had been listening for this, and it had been too far and too deep and too long asleep to answer. "What are you?" she whispered. The great pale thing did not speak. But the roots nearest her stirred, and one slender tendril, no thicker than a finger, uncurled from the wall, and reached toward her torn hand, toward the blood, and stopped, waiting, asking. She gave it her hand. The tendril touched the cut, and the warmth that had been a comfort became for one blinding moment a flood, and Vesna saw. She saw the castle whole and bright, 1,000 years gone. She saw people in it who were not wolves, who wore green and gray, who put their hands to the stone and made the dead earth of the moors bloom, who took in the lost and the hunted and the cast-off from every land around and gave them a place and a name and a home. Rootborn, the vision named them, the old blood, the keepers of the deep tree, the ones the land itself had chosen. And she saw the wolves come, Rurik's line, the high pack, generation on generation ago, and she saw them break the rootborn, and bury the tree, and forbid the castle, and teach their pups to fear the one ground in all of Valemore that had ever taken in the unwanted. And she saw, last, a woman with the vision's own eyes press a bleeding hand to the hollow in the courtyard stone and say, "While one drop of our blood remains in the world, the deep will wake for it, and the house will rise again." The vision let her go. Vesna was on her knees on the cavern floor, weeping, and she did not know when she had started. She was not a foundling with no line. She had a line older than kings. She was not wolfless. She was rootborn, the last of them, and the great deep thing beneath Elderfell was hers, the way a wolf was Rurik's. And it had been waiting, under the mockery of her whole ruined life, for her to bleed on the right stone. She stayed the night in the warm, and she learned it, that first night, the way you learn a language you were born speaking and never taught, by using it. She found that where she pressed her bloodied hand to the old dead soil of the lower halls, green came, Moss first, then grass, then impossibly, in the space of an hour, a low tangle of vine, heavy with a pale fruit, she ate without fear. She found that the roots would warm a room to summer if she asked. She found a chamber deep in the rock, dry and whole, and by the hour the light began to fail. She had made it a place a person could live. Warm stone, soft moss, a spring of clean water, she had coaxed up out of the floor with the flat of her hand. A home. In a single night, out of nothing, she had made herself a home no one in the world knew existed. In the one place no one in the world would follow. She was laughing at the wonder of it, actually laughing aloud, alone in the deep, when the light began to die, and she learned the price. It did not fade gently. As the unseen moon outside set toward its own dark hour, the great trees' glow guttered like a lamp starved of oil. Dimming, dimming, and Vesna felt the warmth pull back out of her, back down into the deep, and understood all at once that the waking had an hour and the hour was ending. The green, she had grown wilted where it stood. The warm chamber cooled, and, in the last of the light, lifting her hand to her face, she saw it, a vein of silver. It ran from the cut on her palm, up through the back of her hand, under the skin, bright and metallic and cold, branching like frost on a window, climbing toward her wrist. She scrubbed at it. It did not smear. It was in her, threaded through her, like the roots were threaded through the walls, and where it lay her skin had no feeling at all. On the wall beside her, as the glow failed, the old carved words came clear one final time before the dark took them, and though she had never in her life been taught to read the root-born hand, she found she could read this because it was written in her blood. The deep wakes at the dying of the moon, and only then. It wakes for the blood, and only the blood. And blood by blood, it takes its keeper down into itself, silver by silver, until the silver finds the heart, and then the keeper is the tree, and the tree is the keeper forever. The light went out. Vesna sat in the dark. She had made warm, and was warm no longer, and she looked at the cold silver climbing her hand, and she understood the shape of the rest of her life. She could build a home out of nothing. She could raise the dead ground and warm the frozen stone, and perhaps in time do far more than that. She could make, beneath the castle, the whole world feared, a place for every cast-off soul in Valemore. And every hour of it, every green and warm and living hour, would cost her a little more of the silver, and when the silver reached her heart, it would cost her all of it. She did not weep this time. She sat with it in the dark until the gray of dawn came down the long stair, and she had almost made her peace with the bargain, a short life, but mine, but warm, but free, when a sound came down the stair after the light. A horn. Far off, up on the black ridge, thin and cold in the dawn air, a warden's horn, winding the note that meant found. And under it fainter, a voice she thought she would hear in her nightmares, for the rest of whatever life she had left. Dorion's voice carried down on the wind, giving an order to men who could not cross the tree line, but could, she had no doubt at all, throw fire from the far side of it. The dead castle breathed smoke, the voice called, bright with a terrible delight. So the wolfless queen is not so dead. Burn the trees, burn all of it, burn her out. The trees would not burn. Vesna learned that from the top of the broken gate tower, crouched in the cold dawn wind, watching Rurik's wardens work along the tree line like ants at the edge of a fire that would not catch. They had brought oil and brands. They soaked the black dead trees, and they threw the fire, and the fire took, and then the roots beneath the snow, her roots, now the deep tree's roots, drank the heat down into the ground and starved the flames, white, and put them out. Green smoke rose where the fire died from the ridge. It must have looked like the castle was breathing. It was, in a way, it was breathing for her. They could not burn Elderfell. They could not cross onto its ground. But Vesna watched Dorian sit her horse at the safe edge of the world, in her fine furs, unhurried, patient, and she understood that patience was its own kind of fire. They would ring the ridge with wardens. They would starve out whatever lived in the dark below. Rurik could not be seen to have failed to kill one wolfless woman. Dorian would not sleep easy, while the pack could whisper that the cast-out queen still lived. They would wait her out, and she could not eat smoke, and one day she would have to come up. She did not have the luxury, she realized, of a short life spent warm and free and alone. She had enemies now who knew she lived. And she was beginning to understand. Something worth defending. She was still on the tower when she saw the child. He came out of the dead forest to the north, the far side from the wardens, stumbling, falling, getting up. A boy, 7 winters perhaps, in a shift too thin for the cold, and behind him, half carrying and half carried, an old woman with gray hair loose around a face gray with exhaustion. They were running from something. Vesna knew the run. She had run it the day before, and at the tree line, the boy stopped exactly as the hound had stopped, staring at the castle's ground with the whole of Valemor's fear in his small face, and then a horn sounded behind him, closer now, hunters at his back, and he chose. He grabbed the old woman's hand, and he dragged her across the tree line onto the cursed ground, and nothing drank him down, and nothing struck him dead, and they fell together in the snow of the courtyard and lay there heaving. Vesna came down the tower fast. Up close the old woman was worse than she'd looked. Fever-bright eyes, a wound in her side gone bad, days old. The boy would not speak, opened his mouth, and nothing came, and Vesna saw the old scar at his throat and understood he could not. He put himself between Vesna and the old woman, small fists up, shaking, and would not move. "I won't hurt her," Vesna said. She knelt in the snow to be smaller than him. "I know what it is to be put out with nothing. I was put out yesterday. From that same house you're running from, I'd wager." She turned her torn hand over so he could see the raw mark where the pack brand had been struck away. "See? They cut me loose too. This is the one place in the world they can't follow us. You did right to cross. You did braver than grown wolves I've known." The boy looked at the mark. He looked at her shorn head. Something in him gave all at once, the way a held breath gives, and he began to cry without a sound, and he let her lift the old woman between them and carry her down the long stair into the dark. The old woman's name was Hesper. The boy was Pell. They had been the wise woman and the mute foundling of a village 3 valleys east, and when Rurik's collectors came for the tithe and found the village short, they had taken the tithe in bodies instead. The old, the weak, the wolfless, the ones no pack would miss. And Hesper had gotten the boy out through a drain in the dark and run. And been caught by a warden's blade, and run anyway. "There's more of us," Hesper whispered, when the fever let her surface. "All over Valemore. The ones they throw away. Running. And nowhere to run to." Her fever eyes found Vesna in the dark. "Is it true, what they say of this place, that the ground here takes people in?" "It takes us in," Vesna said, and did not yet know she had decided anything, until she heard herself say it. "The thrown away. Yes, it's true. That night. The dying hour. The only hour she did the thing she had sworn after the silver climbed her hand that she would ration, like her own blood. Because it was her own blood, she woke the deep. She grew food enough for 3. She warmed the stone. And she laid her bared hand against the old woman's rotten wound and asked the green to go into it, and watched the black lines pull back and the fever break, and felt, in the same moment, a fresh thread of cold silver branch up past her wrist toward the crook of her elbow. A finger's width closer to her heart. The price of one old stranger's life. She looked at it in the failing light and found she did not regret it. That surprised her too. And Pell was there. Pell watched the whole waking with his enormous, silent eyes, watched the green climb, and the tree glow, and the old woman's death get pushed back down into the ground. And Vesna felt a bolt of pure terror go through her, because the words on the wall had been clear. "It wakes for the blood, and only the blood. And it must not be witnessed by any other." She had felt that rule even where she couldn't read it, felt that to be seen would be to break it. But the deep did not recoil from the boy. The great tree glowed on, untroubled. The roots, if anything, leaned toward him, gentle, the way they leaned toward her. And Vesna understood, kneeling in the warm with the silver in her arm, and the saved old woman breathing easy, and the mute child's hand creeping into her free one. Understood a second rule. 1. The wall had not taught her. 1 she would stake everything on before the end. It only feared the ones who came to take. Pell had come with nothing. So had Hesper. So had she. It was the first warm and hopeful thing she had felt since the drums stopped, and it lasted exactly as long as it took the horn to sound again. Not from the ridge, this time. Not from the safe far edge of the world. From the courtyard, from inside the tree line, from the one place no wolf in all of Valemore could stand. Someone had crossed onto Elderfell's ground. Vesna went up the stair with her heart slamming, Pell's terror at her back, and came out into the last gray of the dawn to find a man standing in the middle of her courtyard, in the falling snow, a big man, still, with a soldier's stillness, a bow of green wood in his hand, and a scar cutting pale through the dark of his beard and one eye. The stranger from the gate, the one who had given her his cloak, the one who had said you are not what they think you are, and been right, standing on the ground that no wolf could bear to touch, standing there as easily as she did. You, Vesna breathed. You lived, the scarred man said, and something eased in his one eye that looked as though it had been clenched tight for 2 days. Good. Then we don't have much time. He glanced back over his shoulder, toward the ridge, toward the ring of fire and patience. Doriane was drawing tight around the only home Vesna had ever had. Because I know what you are now, Rootborn. And I am not the only one still living who does. Vesna did not lower her guard. Every wolf in Valemore would sooner walk into fire than stand where you're standing, she said. So either you're no wolf, or you're something worse. Give me one reason not to send the ground under your feet, down into the dark. If she could even do that. She had no idea if she could do that. But he did not know that. And a shorn barefoot woman learns quickly to sound certain. The scarred man did not reach for the bow. He set it down in the snow, slowly, and spread his empty hands. The ground let me cross because I came with nothing. And I mean you no harm, he said. You've already felt it. The deep won't take a soul that comes empty and open. It only shuts against the ones who come to take. He watched that land in her face. You worked that out yourself. 2 nights, and you already know more of what you are than the pack spent 3 winters making sure you'd never learn. And what am I? It came out harder than she meant. Say it. Everyone in my life has known some secret about me and fed me a lie instead. You want my trust. Start with the truth, all of it, right now. So, he told her. He told her the Rootborn had kept this castle 1,000 years. The old blood the land itself had chosen, who made the dead moors bloom and took in the hunted and the cast-off from every kingdom around. He told her how the wolves came, generation on generation ago, and broke them, and buried the great tree, and forbade the ground, and taught their pups to fear the one place in Valemore that had ever sheltered the unwanted, because a people who fear a place will never think to look for what sleeps beneath it. They didn't kill all of you, he said. They couldn't. While 1 drop of Rootborn blood lived in the world, the deep could wake. So the High Pack made it their quiet work, king after king, to hunt the last of your line down and end it. And near enough, 20 winters ago, their colors found a family living wild in the eastern forest. The last free Rootborn in the world. The wind moved in the dead trees. Vesna found. She could not speak. They killed them, Emmerich said gently, because there was no gentle way. All but one. A child. Too small to remember. And they did not kill her, because a dead Rootborn is one thing, but a living one, leashed, is a lock on the deep that never has to be checked again. His one eye did not leave her. They carried the child back to Grimhold. They raised her in the king's own house. They told her she was a foundling, a nothing, no line, and no wolf. And when she was grown, they wed her to the Alpha King himself, so the last of the old blood would spend her whole life shamed and watched, and above all kept far, far from any old stone she might bleed upon and weigh. Wolfless, Vesna whispered, the word she had worn like a wound her whole life. It was never a sickness, it was the cage, Emeric said. You were never broken, Vesna. You were the most dangerous thing their line had ever caught, and they made certain you'd believe you were the least. She thought of the fever nights, the children she'd nursed, the people whose grief she'd sat inside, the 3 winters of lying in the dark waiting for a wolf, while somewhere under a castle they'd taught her to fear. The thing that was actually hers had been waiting too, and dying of the wait. Her whole life had not been a life. It had been a lock, turned on a door, holding a door shut, and Rurik, in his beautiful vanity, wanting the golden Dorian at his side, had thrown the lock out into the snow without ever knowing what he'd freed. He doesn't know, she said slowly. Rurik. He cast me out because I embarrassed him. He has no idea what he's done. No, Emeric's jaw tightened. But there is one in Grimhold who knows exactly what you are, who has known it for a lifetime, who built your cage with his own hands. And by now that one has seen the smoke on the ridge and understood what it means. Rurik freed you by accident. That one will spend everything he has to put you back in the ground before the king ever learns the truth. And you. Her voice shook now, with something that was not quite fear. How do you know all this? Colors don't confess their work. Who are you? That you've carried the pack's oldest secret out here into the cold. For the first time the scarred man looked away. Before he could answer, a rasp came from the dark of the stairwell behind her. Hesper. On her feet, when she should not have been, one hand white-knuckled on the broken arch, staring past Vesna, at the man in the snow, with an expression Vesna had seen only on people looking at the dead. Pell hovered at the old woman's elbow, wide-eyed. I know that face, Hesper breathed, older now, cut about, but I nursed in the high halls 40 years, boy, and I'd know that face at the bottom of a grave. Her voice cracked. They said you were dead. They mourned you. The whole pack wore gray a season for the king's own brother. The courtyard went very still. The king's brother, Vesna repeated. Emeric closed his one eye, as though a weight he'd carried a long way had finally been set where everyone could see it. The king's elder brother, Hesper said, true-born and first, the one who was meant to rule. He would not reach for the crown now any more than he had taken it in life. Firstborn means nothing among wolves, Emeric said later, when the fire Vesna had grown in the deep had burned the cold out of the lower hall and Hesper slept and Pell had finally, warily, closed his eyes. The alpha is the strongest, not the eldest. Rurik was always going to have it. I made my peace with that as a boy. He turned a cup of the pale fruit wine in his hands and did not drink it. I did not make my peace with what I found in the king's cellars 12 winters ago, the records of the Cullings. The account of a child brought in from the eastern forest, and what she was, and why she was to be kept alive, and kept small. His thumb moved over the scar, through his eye. I went to free her. I was 20. I was a fool. They took this for it, and my name, and put out through the pack that I died of a wasting fever, and cast me into the wild to make it true. 12 winters, Vesna said. You were a girl of 9. He said it quietly. I couldn't reach you. I couldn't come near Grimhold, so I did the only thing an exile with nothing can do. He looked up, and his one eye was steady and unashamed. I watched, every year from the far ridges. I watched them raise you, and shame you, and marry you off, and I could not do one single thing but wait for a door to open. And 2 mornings ago, in the king's own yard, he opened it himself. Vesna understood. Then the thing in his face when she'd stepped out of the gate alive. Not a stranger's pity. 12 winters of a held breath. Let go. She did not know what to do with being watched over. She had been watched at her whole life. This was a different thing, and it undid her more than cruelty ever had, and so she did what she always did with feeling. She put it away and put herself to work. And there was work. Word travels along the roads, the thrown-away walk, the drainage ditches and the goat tracks and the backs of things, and it had begun to travel now. There is a place in the north the collectors can't come. The dead castle takes people in. They arrived in ones and twos out of the dead forest. A tithed family, a runaway bonded girl, two brothers too old to work and marked for the coal, a deserter from Rurik's own wardens who'd refused to burn a village. Each of them stopped at the tree line with the whole of Valemor's fear in their faces, each of them having nothing left to lose, crossed, and not one was struck down, because not one came to take. Vesna fed them all. That was the thing she could do. The impossible thing. The thing 3 winters of a cage had never guessed at. In the dying hour when the moon set and the deep woke to her blood, she raised food out of dead ground and warmth out of cold stone, and made room by room and soul by soul. A home beneath the forgotten castle for everyone the world above had thrown away. And every hour of it the silver climbed. It was past her elbow now. On the big wakings, the nights she grew enough to feed 20, she could feel it move. A cold, bright inch of it threading toward her shoulder, toward the hollow of her collarbone, toward the slow, warm drum of her heart. She kept her arm wrapped. She told no one. A queen of nothing does not get to be afraid where her people can see. Emmerich saw, anyway. He never followed her down to the deep. She'd told him she needed to be alone for the waking, and he'd simply accepted that, the way he accepted everything. As though her word alone were law enough. But he took to waiting at the top of the long stair each dying hour, a shape in the dark, so that whatever came up out of the deep. She did not come up to no one. They talked through the black of the stairwell, her below and him above the way she supposed other people talked across pillows. He made her laugh. She had not known he could be funny. She had not known she could still laugh. He told her about the wild years, the winters he'd nearly died, the wolf lore he'd unlearned, and the older lore he'd dug out of ruined places like this one. She told him things she had never told a living soul, told them upward into the dark, where a face couldn't shame her. The barrier of the stair between them was the safest she had ever felt with another person. And it was. She began to understand with a kind of terror, not nearly enough distance. It happened on the 12th night. A hard waking, a whole family come in frostbitten, a baby among them, and she'd spent herself keeping the child alive. She came up the stair on legs that would not quite hold, and the dark tilted, and she fell, and Emmerich caught her, one arm at her back, and one hand closing over her wrapped forearm over the silver, holding her whole weight, the way he had in the frost of Grimhold's yard a lifetime ago. And the cold went out of her arm. She felt it happen. Where his hand lay over the silver, the bright ache eased, the frost numbness warmed, as though the price of the waking were flowing out of her and into him, as though he were taking a share of a weight he did not even know she carried. Below them, deep in the dark, the great tree pulsed and brightened, gladder than she had ever felt it, glad, the way it was glad only for her, reaching its light up the stair, toward the two of them together. She tore free so fast she nearly fell again. Vesna, I'm well, I'm only tired. She was already backing away, her wrapped arm cradled to her chest, her heart going like a hunted thing. Go and sleep, Emmerich, please. He went because he always did what she asked, and Vesna stood alone at the top of her stair in the dark, and slowly, with dread, unwound the cloth from her arm to look at what his touch had done. The silver on her own skin had retreated. A full inch back down her arm, away from her heart, for the first time since the deep had marked her. And on the back of Emmerich's hand, where he had held her, she had seen it in the tree's glad light, and only now let herself know she'd seen it. A single thread of cold bright silver had begun, faint as frost, to climb. She should have told him. She knew. She should have told him. Instead, She did the thing she was best at, the thing a caged life had trained into her bones. She decided, alone, in the dark, that she would carry it by herself, and she began to build the walls. The next dying hour, she did not let him wait at the stair. "I need it quiet," she said, not meeting his eye. "Wait in the west hall." The night after, she sent him further, to the gate watch, useful and far. She stopped talking upward into the dark. When he sought her out in the daylight hours, she found reasons. The family with the baby, Hesper's cough, the 200 small emergencies of a growing house, and she watched his one eye slowly understand that the reasons were the point. She told herself it was working. The silver on his hand had not climbed further. Distance, it seemed, undid the sharing. That was all she wanted. That was the only thing she wanted. If she said it to herself, enough times, in enough dark rooms, it might even come true. It did not come true. On the 16th night, she came up from a brutal waking. The Eastern collectors had swept 3 more villages, and the newcomers had come in a flood, 40 souls in 2 days, and the silver had crossed onto her chest now, a bright, cold branching over her heart's own ground, and she was so tired, so frightened, so lonely inside the walls. She'd built that, when she found him waiting at the top of the stair. Despite everything, despite every cold word she'd spent on him all that week, something in her simply broke open. "You were told to be at the gate," she said, and her voice cracked straight down the middle. "I was." Emeric didn't move. "I went. And then I stood there in the cold thinking about you coming up out of that dark, alone, night after night, carrying whatever it is you won't let me see. And I found I would rather you send me away to my face than have me obey you from a distance and pretend I don't know I'm being cut off." He said it without heat, without a plea, only the plain, unbearable truth of it. "You don't have to tell me what you carry. You never have to tell me anything, but don't make me stand at a gate and help you be alone. I've been alone 12 winters. Vesna, I know how it's done. I won't help you learn it." And Vesna, heartsick, spent, the cold silver, a hand's breadth from her heart, nearly told him everything. She got as far as reaching for the cloth wound round her arm. She got as far as his name. Then he took a step toward her, into the tree's light. And she saw the silver thread on the back of his hand catch that light. A little longer than it had been, she was sure of it, even now, even at this distance. Some part of her price still creeping into him through nothing but his refusal to leave. And the fear came up in her like a tide and drowned everything else. She would not do to him what the pack had done to her. She would not chain another living soul to a slow, cold dying for the crime of standing near her. So she made her voice into a warden's blade, and she used it on the only person who had ever chosen her. "I don't want you here," she said. "I never asked you to come. You watched me for 12 years from a hill because you couldn't bear your own uselessness. And now you've made me your last chance to be something, and I am not that. I am not yours to save. I have 40 people who need me, and no room left over for a broken exile who followed me home like a dog. Go back to your ridges, Emeric. I release you." "Go." She watched it go into him. She watched, because she made herself watch the way she'd walked the frost on her own 2 feet. She saw the thing in his one eye that had been unclenched since Grimhold's gate close up again, all the way, forever. He did not argue. Of course he did not argue. He was a man who'd been taught by his whole life that he was a thing to be cast out, and she had just spoken to him in the one language he'd never learned to doubt. "As you say," he said quietly. "My lady." He gathered his bow. He was gone before first light. And Vesna went down into the deep and put her bleeding hand to the great tree and wept into the warmth of it until she had nothing left. And the silver over her heart did not retreat 1 thread, because the only thing that had ever eased it had just walked out into the snow. She was still down there, hollow-eyed and alone, in the gray of the morning after when Pell came flying down the long stair, faster than she had ever seen. The boy moved, his silent mouth stretched around a scream that would not come, dragging at her hand pointing up. She took the stairs, 2 at a time. In the courtyard, one of the newcomers, a quiet man she'd welcomed 3 days past, a man who had crossed the tree line as easily as any soul with nothing to take, stood over Hesper's crumpled body, a blade in his hand, and turned, unhurried, toward Vesna, and smiled the way a man smiles when the thing he was sent a long way to do is finally to in reach. The keeper sends his regards, little Locke, he said. He'd have preferred you back in the cage. But dead in the dark will do. Later, Vesna would understand how the assassin had crossed ground that turned away every soul who came to take. The keeper had not sent a hater or a zealot. He had sent a hollow man, a debtor with nothing left in him. No rage, no hunger, not even much wish to live. Only an old instruction, worn smooth as a river stone. The deep could not read a purpose the man himself barely held. You cannot bar a door against a will that isn't there. But she did not understand it then. Then there was only Hesper crumpled and bleeding on the courtyard stone, and Pell's silent scream, and a bare blade turning toward her. You'll want to hold still, the hollow man said, almost kind. It's quicker. Vesna did not hold still. She flung out her torn hand at the ground the way she did in the dying hour. But it was full morning, the deep was asleep, and nothing answered but a shiver in the dead vines along the wall. The man stepped over Hesper, and Vesna saw, in the half-second before her whole world narrowed to the blade, that the old woman was breathing, shallow and fast, one hand pressed to her side, hurt, badly, but not gone. Not yet. Pell threw himself at the man's legs and was knocked away like a kicked dog, and scrambled up, and would have thrown himself again if Vesna had not screamed at him to run, get behind, go. And even then, the boy only backed to the wall and set his small jaw and would not leave her, and she loved him and hated the sight of him there in the same breath. Vesna backed until the fallen pillar caught her spine, and there was nowhere left to go, and she thought, with a strange, clear calm, so this is how the last of them ends, in the cold, with nothing, after all. 3 winters a cage, a scant fortnight a queen, and now a hollow man's borrowed knife. It did not even seem unfair. It seemed almost like the shape her life had always been bending toward. Then a shape came over the broken gate at a dead run, and the morning tore open with a sound she had never heard him make. Emmerich had not gone to his ridges. He had gotten as far as the tree line and no farther, and he had sat down in the snow just beyond the ground that would still, even now, even cast out, let him cross, and he had been sitting there arguing with himself when Pell's soundless terror reached him the way only the desperate. He crossed the courtyard before the hollow man could turn. He put himself between the blade and Vesna, the way a wall puts itself between a house and a storm, without calculation, because it was simply what he was. The blade found him, instead of her. He put the hollow man down anyway. A wolf's strength does not need a wolf's shape when the thing behind Emmerich is Vesna. And then he sat down very suddenly, on the cold stone, a dark stain spreading across his side, and looked up at her and said, "There. That's the once. That's the thing I came 12 years to do. Don't." Vesna was on her knees in front of him, hands already pressed to the wound, and it would not stop. "Don't you dare. Not for me. Not you too." Rootbane on the blade. His voice was going thin. He knew the smell of it. Every wolf did. There's no wolf healing pulls that back. "It's all right. It's a fair trade, Vesna. It was always a fair. Stop bargaining your life like it's worth less than mine." She did. The only thing she could do. She could not wake the deep in daylight for a whole house. But she could wake it for one man if she gave it enough of herself to make up the difference, and she did not stop to count the cost. Because there are moments a caged life cannot train out of you, and this, it turned out, was hers. She tore the cloth from her silvered arm, and she drove her bleeding hand and his bleeding wound together against the old stone of the courtyard, and she called the heart root up through a mile of rock in the full light of morning, and she gave, the ground groaned. Far below, the great tree woke out of its day sleep like a sleeper, hauled up by the hair, and it did not want to, and she made it, and it took its payment for being made. The silver went up her arm like fire made of cold, past her shoulder, across her chest. She felt it find the last dry ground above her heart, and branch there, bright and patient, and she did not care. Beneath her hands, the root-bane blackness drew back out of Emeric's side. The wound closed clean, the gray went out of his face, and the breath came back into him, deep and whole, and his wolf went out like a candle. She felt that too, through the place their blood mixed on the stone, felt the thing that had run in him since birth, the true-born wolf of the king's own line, gutter and thin, and break under the weight of the old root-born magic she'd poured through him to hold him in the world. When she took her hands away, Emeric was alive and healed, and staring at his own hands with the look of a man who has just gone deaf in a house full of music. Everyone else can still hear. "It's quiet," he whispered. "Vesna, it's quiet." "Where did it?" His breath caught. "You didn't. You'd have died. You unmade my wolf to keep me." He said it not as an accusation but as something worse, something like awe and horror braided together. She did not know how to answer that. She had lain wolfless her whole life and called it a wound. She had never once thought what it would be to have the wolf and then lose it, to have run under the moon since before you could walk, and then stand in a sudden and permanent silence where the running used to be. She watched him reach for it, reach inside himself the way a man reaches, for a step in the dark that isn't there, and find nothing, and reach again, and find nothing, and go very still. Pell crept out from the wall and put a hand on Emeric's knee, small and certain, the way one silenced creature knows another. Emeric looked down at the boy who had never had a voice, and something in his ruined face settled terribly into acceptance. Then his eyes went to her chest, to the bright, cold branching visible now above the neck of her dress, climbing a hand's breadth from her heart, and no more. "And it cost you?" He couldn't finish. "That's your life. That's you spending your own life to buy mine. You impossible. You a horn split the morning. Not from the ridge where the wardens had ringed her in for a fortnight. From beyond it, a great blaring column of them, the war horns of the high pack. The sound, Vesna had heard only once, on the day Grimhold went to put down the Eastern Rebellion. The sound of the whole strength of Valemore on the march. Pell was already at the gate, pointing north with his whole shaking arm. The keeper had failed to kill her quietly, so the keeper had done the last thing left to him. He had gone to the Eltha King, and he had told Rurik at last exactly what he had thrown out into the snow. And Rurik was coming to Elderfell with fire, enough to burn the forgotten ground down, to the bones of the world. They had 3 days before the host reached the ridge. A host moves slowly, and the dead forest fought it every mile. Vesna could feel the deep dragging at their boots now, waking a little of itself against them, without her even asking, the way a sleeping dog growls at a footstep. 3 days. It was not enough time to run, and there was nowhere to run to, and there was nothing left to do with 3 days, except the one thing she had refused herself. Since the silver first climbed her hand, she stopped building walls. She sat with Emeric that first night in the deep hall, close, no stair between them, and she told him all of it, the dying hour, the price, the words on the wall, the silver that would take her heart and make her the tree. She showed him her arm and her chest without wrapping them. She told him what his touch had done that 12th night, how the cold had eased and flowed toward him, how she had driven him off with a warden's tongue, not because she didn't want him, but because she wanted him too much to chain him to her dying. Emeric listened the way he did everything, without hurry, all of him. When she finished, he was quiet a long moment. "So let me chain myself," he said. "Emeric, you told me the deep shuts against the ones who come to take, but it brightens for the ones who give. You said it yourself. It's glad when I'm near you, glad the way it's glad for no one else." You've been thinking of it as a theft. My life leaking into you, against my will." He took her silvered hand and laid it flat between both of his, and she felt the cold ease, felt the deep, far below, pulse, warm and glad and right. "But it isn't a theft if I give it, is it? That's the difference. The pack fed your line to that tree, one lonely keeper at a time, blood by blood, until it killed them, because they made your people carry it alone." His one eye held hers, fierce now. "You are not alone, I am giving you this." Not being taken from. Giving. They tried it that night, and it was true. When he set his hands to the stone beside hers, and gave himself to the waking, freely, meaning it, wanting it, the deep drank from him gently, so gently. Nothing like the ravenous silver cost it took from her, because a thing given in love weighs nothing at all. And her silver retreated an inch, then two. She watched the bright cold pull back down out of the ground above her heart for the first time since Elderfell had marked her, and she put her face in her hands and shook. For 2 days the dead forest greened at the edges where the two of them walked it together. For 2 days the home beneath the castle was not a place she was dying to keep alive, but a place they were, impossibly, living in. She had not known, until she had it, what it was she had been building. In the cage of her old life, she had learned to think of herself as a lock, a function, a thing that kept a door shut. Down here, she was something else. 40-odd of the worlds thrown away, lived in the warm halls. Now the tithed family with their frostbitten baby grown pink and furious and loud. The 2 old brothers who'd been marked for the cull, and now spent their days teaching Pell to whittle. The deserter warden who had refused to burn a village and flinched, still, at every raised voice, and had begun, only this week, to unflinch. They called her nothing grand. They did not kneel. They argued with her about the stores and the sleeping rooms, and whose turn it was at the spring, and it was, she thought, the first time in her whole life anyone had treated her as though she were simply a person among persons, and it undid her more than any crown could have. Hesper mended, propped in the warmest corner, directing the running of the whole deep house from a nest of moss, with the ferocity of a woman who had nursed the high halls 40 years and did not intend to be idle now. Pell laughed his silent laugh and shadowed Emmerich everywhere, and Emmerich, wolfless, throneless, quiet, taught the boy to set a snare and read a track and stand still in the dark without fear, and did not once seem to notice that in the doing of it he had become, to a mute and thrown-away child, the whole shape of what a man could be. And Vesna, for the first time in a life built entirely of other people's lies about her, was simply happy. On the 3rd evening, she and Emmerich stood together on the gate tower and watched the fires of the host come over the black ridge, 1,000 points of it, and she was not afraid the way she had been, because she was not carrying it alone. "I spent 12 years telling myself I watched over you out of duty," Emmerich said, into the dark, not looking at her. "The last free root born, a wrong that wanted righting. It was a good enough lie. It kept me warm on the ridges some nights. The fires crept lower down the far slope, unhurried, certain. It stopped being that lie, a long time ago. I think it stopped the first winter, if I'm honest, and I've been calling it duty ever since because a man alone on a hill has no right to call it anything else. Emmerich, I know what I am now. Wolfless, no throne, no pack, a share of your dying threaded through my hand." He turned to her at last, and in the last of the light, his one eye was not ashamed of anything. "And I have never in my life wanted to be anywhere but exactly here, next to you, watching an army come to kill us both. That's a poor gift, Vesna. It's the only one I've got. I'd like you to have it anyway." She saw him decide to finish it. She saw the last words come up in him. And then, below them, at the tree line, a single old man in gray stepped out of the dark of the trees and walked, unhurried and unhurt, across the ground that no soul who came to take had ever been able to cross. Vesna's blood went to ice. Hello, little Locke, the keeper called up. Pleasant, patient, a voice she knew from the deepest cellar of her childhood, without ever having a face to hang it on. He smiled up at the tower. Did you truly think I didn't know the way in? I wrote the way in. I have been coming and going from this ground since before your grandmother bled on it. He spread his empty hands, and Vesna understood, sickened, exactly what he was. A man so hollowed by a lifetime of one cold purpose that he had nothing left in him for the deep to bar. Now, come down and open the deep, and let us put the tree back to sleep the proper way this time. Or stay up there and watch your king burn every green and living thing you've made, and every thrown-away soul you gathered down into the dark. Your choice. His smile widened. You always did have a choice. That was the cruelest part. You just never knew it. Vesna came down. She came down not because he told her to, but because she would not fight this from a tower, like a thing being besieged. She came out through her own broken gate into her own courtyard, with Emeric at her shoulder and Pell's hand briefly, fiercely, in hers before Hesper. Drew the boy back, and she faced the keeper on the ground her blood had woken, with the fires of the whole high pack burning on the ridge behind him. You killed my family, she said. I ended a war your family kept alive by refusing to die. The keeper said it without heat. The Rootborn were a wound in the side of the wolf kingdoms for 1,000 years, a people the very ground preferred to its rightful rulers. I closed the wound, all but one stitch. He tilted his head. I have watched you your whole life, girl. I chose your name. I chose your husband. I chose the shape of every shame you ever wore, so that you would grow up small and certain and safe. I think, the only one who ever truly understood what you are. That is a kind of love, in its way. The keeper's eyes moved to him, and something flickered. The first crack in the patience. The dead prince still not dead, and wolfless now, I'm told. He laughed softly. How fitting, the two of you. The reject and the ghost. What a kingdom you'll make. On the ridge a horn sounded, and the fires began to move down. Vesna looked at Emeric. He looked at her. And there was no more time for walls, or fear, or bargaining lives, and so she said the only thing left. The thing, under everything. Will you give it with me? All of it. Now, yes, he said. Always. That was the once, and this is the always. They knelt together, and put their 4 hands to the courtyard stone, and Vesna woke the heart root, not a room of it, not a hall of it, but all of it, the whole vast, 1,000-year deep of it, and this time she did not wake it alone. The ground of Elderfell rose. The dead forest tore itself green in an instant, a wall of it, and the fires of the host guttered and drowned as living wood refused to burn. Roots came up through the frozen earth of the ridge like the fingers of something enormous turning over in its sleep, and they did not harm one's soul. The deep had never wanted to harm, it had only ever wanted to keep, but they took the fire, and took the swords, and took the ground itself out from under the pride of Valemore, and set the whole marching strength of the high pack gently, immovably on its back in the greening snow. It was the largest thing Vesna had ever felt move through her, and it did not feel like power. It felt like welcome, like a great house throwing open every door it owned at once, after 1,000 years of holding them shut. Every dead tree in that black forest remembered in a single instant that it was alive. Moss ran up the ruined walls like a green tide going the wrong way. The frozen spring in the courtyard broke and sang. And through it all, the heartroot poured its gladness up into her and out of her and into Emeric and back, a circle with no cost in it, no silver, no dying. Because for the first and only time in 1,000 years the deep was being woken by two who had chosen each other, and it had been so starved for that, so long. Vesna saw Rurik down there among the scattered host, thrown from his horse, magnificent and furious and utterly, finally powerless, on the ground that had never once been his. He got to his feet, of course he got to his feet. He was still an alpha king, and pride is the last thing to lie down, and he stared up through the green light at the tower where she stood blazing, and for one moment across all that distance their eyes met. She watched him mouth a word. It might have been her name. It might have been how. She gave him nothing back. She had walked his frost. On her own 2 feet once. He could stand in her. Spring on his. She saw Doriane's golden face gone white beside him. Saw her already turning, already calculating the wind. And she saw the 1,000 points of fire wink out, one after another, all across the ridge, and the dark come alive and green. And the keeper who had walked this ground for 60 years, because he had hollowed himself of everything the deep could refuse, stood in the center of the woken courtyard and screamed at the roots to take him, to know him, to obey the lore he had mastered. The heartroot brightened around him and did not touch him. It simply at last, with a patience 1,000 years deep, refused to know he was there. "You wrote the way in," Vesna said. "You never once came with anything to give. You came empty every time, and called it mastery. The deep let you pass the way a house lets a draft pass. It was never yours. It was only ever waiting for someone to come home." The green closed over the place where he had built her cage, and the keeper was gone into the deep he'd spent his life keeping asleep. And it took him the way it had always taken, silver by silver, forever. It was won. All of it, in a single blazing hour. The home beneath the forgotten castle had risen up and thrown the Alpha King of Vale Moor onto his back in the snow, and every thrown-away soul in the deep was safe, and the last of the root-born knelt victorious on her own returned ground. And Vesna was dying. The great waking had spent her past anything Emmerich's giving could hold back. She felt the silver leap, the last dry ground, and touch her heart, felt it close cold fingers around the one warm drumming thing she had left. And she folded down onto the stone, and the green light of her own risen kingdom swam and dimmed. No. Emmerich had her against him. "No, no, take it, take mine, take all of it," and he was already giving, pouring himself into the root to buy her back. And it was not enough. A thing freely given weighed too little. Love alone could not outrun a whole tree's hunger, and he knew it. She felt him know it, and she felt him make the other choice. The whole choice, everything, not shared, given. "You are the last queen of the oldest blood in the world," he said into her hair, fast, fierce, final, already unbinding some deep knot of himself and feeding it whole into the deep. "You will raise a kingdom out of this ground. You will take in every lost soul left in the world. And you cannot do it dead, and you will not do it chained to a wolfless ghost who's only ever been good for one thing. So let this be the thing. Let me be worth this one. Live. Vesna. Rise. I never needed you to save me. I only needed you to let me." The silver at her heart shuddered and began, as his life poured past hers into the root, to retreat. He was doing it. He was going to die to make her a queen alone, exactly as she had once tried to die alone, to spare him, and she understood, in a white flash of fury and love, that he had learned the wrong lesson from her. That they had both learned it, that it was the pack's own lie wearing a nobler face. You must carry it alone. Let the last thing the root-born ever did be one more lonely keeper, feeding the tree. "No," Vesna said. It came out of her, not as a scream, but as the quietest, hardest word she had ever spoken, the word she had never once been permitted in her whole caged life. No, and it stopped him the way nothing else could have, because he had never heard her use it on him and mean stay. She got her silvered hand up and closed it over his, over the place where his life was pouring away into the deep, and she did not pull it back. She could not stop a gift freely given. That was the whole terrible law of the thing. She had felt it the moment the deep first drank from her, that what is offered in love cannot be refused or reclaimed. She could not haul him back from the edge he'd stepped off. The law would not let her, but the law cut both ways. If a gift, freely given, could not be taken back, then it could be matched. So, she did. The only thing the law left her, the thing the keeper in 60 years and the pack in 1,000, had never once imagined. Because it had never once occurred to any of them that the answer to a lonely sacrifice was not to prevent it, but to refuse to let it be lonely. She gave too, freely, fully, not to rise, not for the kingdom, or the crown, or the last of her line, or destiny, or the thrown away, or any of the grand cold reasons men had been spending her life for since before she could remember. She gave herself to the deep for him, for the plain, small selfish reason that a life spent being a queen without him was a cage she had already served her whole sentence in and would not enter again. "If you go, I go," she said. "That's the always. You don't get to decide my future for me. Not you too, Emmerich. Not even to save it. We carry it together, or we don't carry it at all." And the heartroot, the great deep patient thing that had waited 1,000 years under a mountain of other people's fear, took 2 lives freely given, in love, at once, each for the other and neither for itself, and found it did not need to keep them. That was the secret the pack had buried so deep they'd forgotten it themselves. The secret that had killed every lonely keeper for 1,000 years. The deep had never wanted a life. It had wanted what a life given in love proved. It had wanted a home, 2 souls who chose each other over everything. Over even the tree, over even survival, because that, and only that, was the thing worth waking 1,000 years for. 1 keeper feeding it alone, it drained to death, hunting forever for the thing it needed. 2 keepers who chose each other. It could finally rest around and warm and keep. The silver went out of Vesna's heart like frost off a window in the sun. She felt it leave Emmerich too, through their joined and bleeding hands, felt the whole bright cold weight of it retreat down and down into the deep where it belonged, transformed into something that was not a price anymore, but a bond, steady, warm, a low glad drum beneath her skin that she knew, without asking, she would feel for the rest of a long, long life every time he was near. When she turned her arm over in the green light, the silver was still there, threaded fine under the skin from wrist to heart, but it was warm now, and it was his as much as hers, and it did not climb. It only glowed, faintly, like a road home lit at night. "You were supposed to live," Emmerich said. His voice was wrecked. "You were supposed to rise." That was the whole. I had it worked out, Vesna. It was a good plan. It was a terrible plan. She was crying and laughing at once, and so was he, both of them kneeling, wrecked. It was the pack's own plan wearing your face. Carry it alone. Be the noble one. Spare her. She pressed his hand flat against her chest, over the warm glow, over her heart still stubbornly beating under it. "I have been spared and managed, and protected, and decided for my entire life, by people who swore it was love. I am done being saved by anyone who won't let me save them back. Do you understand me? If we do this, the kingdom, the thrown away all of it, we do it the way we just did that together, or not at all. Together," he said like a vow, like the only word he had left, or not at all. She took his scarred face in both her hands, the way he had once taken hers in the frost of Grimhold's yard, a lifetime and a season ago, and she kissed him at last on the risen ground of her returned kingdom. He went, still for 1 heartbeat, the way a man goes still, who has spent his whole life certain he was a thing to be cast out, and is only now, at 30-odd and wolfless and half dead in the grass, learning otherwise. And then his hands came up into her hair, gentle, reverent, disbelieving. And he kissed her back with the whole of a devotion, 12 years long. Through their joined skin, the bond opened wide, and Vesna felt everything he felt at once. No barrier left anywhere between them. The awe, the ruined, disbelieving joy, the grief for the wolf that was gone, and the astonishment that it did not, next to this, seem to matter, and beneath all of it, woven through everything, steady as the deep itself, his love. And the heart-root blazed up around them, glad, 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 glad the way it had been glad, for no one in all its long sleeping, because for the first time in 1,000 years it had come home. Pell reached them first, barreling across the courtyard to fling his arms around them both, and then Hesper, and then the deserter warden, and the two old brothers and the tithed family with their furious pink baby, the whole thrown-away household of the deep, pouring up into the green light to stand in a place that no longer had to be hidden from anyone. Below, on the greening ridge, the whole strength of Vilemore lay in the snow and watched the forgotten castle fill with light, and understood, every one of them, that the age of the Wolf Kings had ended in an afternoon and something older and far kinder had come back to keep the north. They came north in the spring because everyone did now. Word travels along the roads, the thrown-away walk, and the word had changed. It no longer said run. It said there is a place that takes you in, and they came, the tithed and the culled and the wolfless, and the too old and the too small, out of Valemore and out of kingdoms Vesna had never heard of. An Elderfell rose to meet them. Not a hidden home beneath a castle any longer. A castle risen whole and green, above its own deep heart, towers mended, the dead forest turned to orchard, and over its gate, no packmark and no crown, but a spiral, worn smooth, with a hollow at its center, where the old blood was welcome to answer. Rurik came in the spring, too. He came as a supplicant, because there was little else left to be. His pack had thinned to a fraction as the thrown-away walked north. His golden Dorian had read the wind and gone. His crown sat on a kingdom that no longer feared the one ground it had always used to frighten its children into obedience. He was brought through the risen gate, and he stood in the green light of the courtyard, where he had once been thrown on his back in the snow, and he looked at the woman on the seat at the top of the steps, and did not, for a long moment, know her. Then he did. Vesna watched the knowing cross his beautiful face, watched him understand that the wolfless embarrassment he had torn a cord from and put barefoot into the frost was the last queen of the oldest and greatest blood in the world, beloved of the very land. Radiant with a power his line had spent 1,000 years trying to bury, watched him see the brother he had mourned standing whole and unbothered at her side, one scarred hand resting easy over hers. She watched Rurik understand, at last and all at once, exactly what he had held in his hands for 3 winters and thrown away because it did not flatter him. "You came to me with nothing," she said, before he could speak. She said it gently. She had spent a long winter, deciding she would say it gently, and mean it. "You told me to remember that when I was cold." Rurik's jaw worked. "Vesna, I did remember it." She rose, and the whole green court rose with the movement of her, and Pell, tall as her elbow now and grinning his silent grin, carried up the terms she had drawn up for the peace of the North. "I came to you with nothing, and when you sent me back into the cold with nothing, I found out at last what nothing was worth in the right ground." She came down the steps, and she was not cruel, and she was not warm, and that was somehow worse for him than either. "Here are my terms, King of Valemore. They are generous. They are more than you left me. Take them, and there will be peace. And your thrown away may come north in safety, and I will not remember the frost against you." He took them. There was nothing else in the world for him to take. When he had gone, Emeric drew her back down beside him in the green light, his thumb moving over her knuckles the way it had since the first night at the top of a dark stair, and the warm, glad drum of the bond beat low and steady beneath both their skins. "No regrets, then," he said. "Queen of nothing. Queen of everyone with nothing," she said. "It turns out that's most of the world." She leaned her head on his shoulder and watched her risen kingdom fill with the people it had waited 1,000 years to keep. "We were each of us thrown away by everyone who was supposed to want us, and we chose each other instead. And out of nothing, together," she lifted her hand, and the whole green castle brightened at the small glad gesture of it, "we built all of this. Thank you for listening." I hope this one stayed with you. Here's what I keep turning over. Emmerich tried to give his whole life so Vesna could rise alone as a queen, the way she once tried to send him off into the snow to spare him her curse. Was that love at its highest? Or was it the same old lie, wearing a kinder face, the belief that we have to carry the hardest things alone? And would you have chosen the way Vesna did, and refused to be saved without him? Tell me in the comments. I read them all, and I'll see you soon for another story.